Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If this isn't working, please, somebody in the back, just let me know. Just good evening. Welcome to this conference. I think it's just so exciting. The history of this conference goes back about 26, 27 years. Eric Frankovich and I were walking in the pilgrimage to Chartres in France, and we were kind of like griping foot soldiers talking about the fact that we need to find a way to get traditional Catholics to sort of get out of their own way so that we could form some sort of more unified counter-revolution. And you just can't understand or maybe fully appreciate what it means to us to see so many people here tonight. Thank you so much for coming and for believing in something that really hasn't been tried before. And a lot of people have wanted to see something like this happen. And I think this weekend is going to be a really good start in that regard. And it's not just you here tonight in this room who have made the great sacrifice to be here, but there are people all around the world tonight that are going to be watching this conference all weekend as well. So this is going to have an impact, I hope, please God, and that Our Lady of Fatima will bless this, or will help us in this endeavor so that God will bless it. Because what it really is people around the world who have decided that enough is enough. That we are not going to be bullied anymore as Catholics, that we are not going to stand down as Catholics, that we are proud to be Catholic, and that we do not have to give apologies to anyone for the fact that we are trying our very best to live the faith and to carry it and to hand it down to our children as it was handed to us. That is the point and purpose, because we're not only trying to defend the Church, but in the process of doing that, we're trying to make sure to promise each other, to make a pledge that we will save our own souls despite everything that is happening in the Church today. This is, in my opinion, take that for what it's worth, the worst crisis in the history of the Catholic Church. And people will oftentimes bring up the Arian crisis. Good precedent. But imagine for a moment if tonight, after this talk, we went out into the lobby and we turned on CNN and we saw that Donald Trump and that crazy man from North Korea were discussing and warring with each other, a war of words, not about whether they want to blow each other's countries up, but about the natures of Jesus Christ. If they were debating when it was that Jesus Christ came into this world, is he subservient to the Father? Is the Father? I mean, can you imagine the absurdity of that? And yet, that, in essence, is what happened in the Arian heresy, where you had emperors and popes and bishops and priests and faithful that were having this massive civil war over the natures of Christ. And I think it's based on that when we consider what we're all going through today and the crisis in the Church today, that we can say ours has no precedent. The Arian crisis, I don't believe, and I'm certainly willing to be corrected by the priests and the bishops and the historians in the room, but I don't believe, I think we've reached a point now where it's worse than the Arian crisis. We face something a lot worse. Worldwide apostasy and a universal denial of the rights of God, a universal denial that God even exists. Governments from one side of the world today to the other rejecting not the kingship of Christ, but the existence of Christ. That is the nature of the crisis that we face. And why is this so? We can come up with lots of reasons why the crisis has reached the proportions that it has, but it is because this is a war between Christ and Antichrist, between good and evil. And this is a war that has been sped up, that has been hastened by the fact that the Catholic Church in her human element has reneged, for all practical purposes, she has reneged on her own infallible dogma that there is no salvation outside of the Catholic Church. And because of that, because the human element of the Church has gone along with the world as it has, to the extent that it has, with noble and wonderful exceptions in the hierarchy, but because most have gone along with this, today we are not debating the natures of Christ. Today we are debating how we should remove all legal restrictions on the slaughter of millions of babies in their mothers' wombs. That's what we have done with our progressive society that rejects the kingship of Christ. We're debating whether unrepentant public adulterers can receive our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament in the Holy Eucharist. We're debating such obscenities as whether two men can get married and adopt children. We're debating when the Catholic Church will decide finally to get on board and accept gay unions. That's next. So again, I would put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, that there's never been a crisis like ours. And at such a moment when we see our beloved church suffering as she is, when the shepherds seem to be struck in the city of God, and when madness reigns in the city of man, we have to look at ourselves and say, what are we going to do about it? What can we do? Not only to keep our faith and make sure that our children keep their faith, but what can we do to defend our mother? Where do we go? What are the sheep supposed to do? How do we keep the faith? So this Catholic Identity Conference is not about some phony ecumenical effort among traditionalists, where at the end of the weekend we're all going to have a big group hug and say, oh, nothing matters. The most important thing is unity, and we can just go on from there. That's not what this is about. That's not what the Catholic Identity Conference is. Our beloved church, in her human element, is suffering through the worst crisis in history, and tonight we are going to begin a 3-day process to discuss how we are going to survive this crisis. We are going to ask the question, what did Catholic men and women in the past, in history, do when they saw similar assaults against the faith and against the church? What did the Vendéens do in France? What did the Catholics during the Western Uprising do in England? What did the Cristeros do? And how can we do something similar to make sure that we uphold our obligation at this most critical moment? That's what this conference is about. And so for 50 years, I just talked to someone here, a woman here tonight, who was at the 13th anniversary of the Remnant. For a very long time, in other words, we've been at this. We've been in the deserts together, wandering, wondering, and warring, too often with each other, and not with those who hate Christ and who hate his followers, who hate us for following him. So we're here tonight, after all these years, we're meeting in this catacomb, this Holiday Inn catacomb, if you will, resolving not to allow, ladies and gentlemen, not to allow the enemies of the church, the enemies of tradition, to divide this little remnant, this little worldwide remnant of the little people who want to keep the faith. We cannot be manipulated to turn on each other in this hour. We have to find a way to come together to keep the faith and to fight as the soldiers of Christ that we are and that we promised to be at our confirmation. We are here tonight to pledge loyalty to the bride of Christ, to ask the intercession of Our Lady of Fatima as we are united under the banner of Christ the King, no matter who would dare to deny his kingship. We know that he's king, and he is king whether the world proclaims it or not. And this little remnant this weekend will proclaim his kingship proudly. And I want to point out, before I turn the podium, the microphone over to our illustrious guest tonight, I want to point out something that fills my heart with joy, and I'm sure all of you in this room, the number of priests that are with us in this catacomb tonight. Tomorrow I'm going to speak briefly in my talk about the men in black from back in the 70s, and some of you are old enough to remember and you know exactly what I mean. Those priests who refused to go along with the revolution and who set up a little circuit and traveled all around the world offering the traditional Latin Mass to the little remnant of believers. But tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're here to celebrate the fact that we have priests from the Society of St. Pius X, from the Fraternity of St. Peter, from the Institute of Christ the King, diocesan priests, priests from all over the country, priests who've kept the faith, young priests who are still hearing the vocation of God. It's proof positive that the revolution has failed. The presence of these priests here tonight, they have not stomped out the faith as they tried to do. And all of these priests in this room who have joined us in their humility, and in their charity, have joined us. They share a common love for Catholic tradition. They share the Catholic truth, a love for Catholic truth, a love for the old traditional Latin Mass, and the desire to help us, to help families who have been displaced by this revolution in the Catholic Church, to help us find our way home at the end of life's pilgrimage. We can't do it without priests, and they're here. Thank you, fathers, for being with us. I know we are very aware, the organizers of this conference are aware of the strategic differences that have come between us, all of us, the various groups of priests especially over the past 25 years, and through no fault of their own, but as another consequence of the revolution in the church. And those differences are not insignificant. We are not up here pretending that we can sweep them all under the rug in one fell swoop. But we all face this dilemma of what to do when rightful ecclesial authority becomes disoriented, as ours most certainly has. What to do when the captain of the ship seems to have lost his way. What to do when the shepherds appear to be struck all around the world now. These are the questions, and they're not easily answered. And over the past 50 years, many good men have asked these questions and tried to answer them, and there are saints, I'm convinced, on all sides of what to do. What strategically, what should we do? But I think what we can all agree on, quite easily, is that the Catholic Church is our mother, she is our castle, and the castle is under siege. And we cannot leave the castle when it's under siege. We cannot go off and start our own church. We cannot crown ourselves popes. Those are not options for us. And these are fundamental points that everyone in this room agrees on. We seek rather to be counted among the remnant of believers in an age of apostasy. And although there are these strategic differences between our priests, between our various camps, they agree on the fundamentals such as that the old faith must survive, that Christ is king even when the world says he's not, that the old Latin Mass is how Catholics prayed for 2,000 years, and it is absolutely essential to keeping the faith and surviving what is coming in the years ahead. And that the family is the first church, the first place where the old faith must survive. And we're not alone. I'll close these welcoming remarks to you tonight for this Catholic Identity Conference 2017 with a reference to a Catholic bishop. A Catholic bishop who is a survivor of the Gulag in the Soviet Union. Literally, a survivor of the Gulag. And who recently noted in another interview that the Catholic family is key to survival. He said that in order to survive this crisis, we must, and I quote, see persecution as a grace from God for becoming purified and strengthened. We must pray with our children the rosary every day. We must turn our homes into domestic churches. We must withdraw our families from parishes that are spreading error and find another alternative, even if it means going great distances. We must be prepared for persecution in protecting our children and keeping the old faith. And I'm assuming you're ahead of me because you know who this bishop is. This bishop who has real life experience in the underground church and whose advice, as I've just quoted to you, is something that the worldwide traditional movement is in 100% agreement on. His name was Anton. He was born in Tokmak in the Soviet Union. His parents were ethnic Germans from Odessa in Ukraine. After the Second World War, they were sent by Stalin through the Gulag in the Ural Mountains, where his family became closely involved with the underground church. This bishop knows what it means to suffer for the faith. When his family were finally released from the concentration camp, they left Central Asia for Estonia, where they lived in Tartu. In 1973, shortly after making his first Holy Communion in secret, had to make his Holy Communion in secret, they emigrated with his family to Rottweil in West Germany. And in 1982, he joined the Canons Regular of the Holy Cross of Coimbra, a Catholic religious order in Austria. he took the religious name of Athanasius upon joining the order, and then he was ordained in 1990. On June 2nd of 2006, Father Athanasius Schneider was appointed a bishop by Pope Benedict, and later that same year, he was consecrated bishop at the altar of the chair of St. Peter in the Vatican. The first time I met Bishop Athanasius Schneider was in Rome, and he gave a little presentation right on the Borgo Pio, just down the street from the Vatican, and I was very impressed with his presentation, and I sort of timidly walked up to him afterwards, and I said, "Your Excellency, do you think you ever might be interested in offering the traditional Latin Mass?" And he says, "But of course, I offer it all the time." I'm telling you, I was filled with hope at that moment. Because as you all know, the church is not a democracy. The church is hierarchical. We are not a democratic organization that's going to change the church from the bottom up. The church must be reformed from the top, as she was designed by Christ. We are sheep, and sheep must have shepherds. So in a day and age when shepherds are too often wolves in sheep's clothing, we are honored this night in this catacomb to have among us a faithful shepherd, a prince of the Catholic Church, a successor of the apostles, living proof that God has not left us orphans. Ladies and gentlemen, England had their John Fisher, Ireland had their Oliver Plunkett, China had their Joseph Kung, and I am so proud to say that we have our Athanasius Schneider. Please rise if you would and welcome Bishop Athanasius Schneider.